If someone had told me years ago that the child I carried in my arms, the boy who clung to my skirt on his first day of school, would one day become the source of my deepest heartbreak, I would have laughed, shaken my head, and told them they didn't know my Daniel. Because back then, back in those early, quiet years in Sheffield, Daniel was my entire world, my beginning and my end. My name is Margaret Turner, and this story doesn't start with pain. It starts with love, with hope, with a mother and her little boy trying their best to survive in a world that wasn't designed to be kind to people like us. I remember the morning everything changed. Daniel was 5 years old, a tiny, soft-spoken boy with curls that bounced when he ran. His father slammed the door so hard the windows shook, leaving behind nothing but a stack of unpaid bills and a silence so sharp it cut straight through the house. Daniel looked up at me with wide, watery eyes and whispered, "Mummy, is Daddy coming back?" There are some questions a mother should never have to answer. I knelt down, wiped his cheeks, and lied with a smile. "We'll be all right, love. We've got each other, haven't we?" From that moment on, everything fell on my shoulders. I took whatever work I could find. In the mornings, I cleaned the local primary school, scrubbing gum from under desks, mopping corridors that smelled of bleach, straightening chairs for children who had no idea how lucky they were. In the evenings, I stocked shelves at Tesco until my fingers ached and my back felt like it might snap. There were nights when exhaustion sat on me like a physical weight. But Daniel never knew. Kids shouldn't know the heaviness of adult struggles. So I always smiled, always told him everything would be fine. Money was tight in ways most people will never understand. I remember opening the fridge on some nights and pretending to think about what I wanted for dinner, when in reality there was nothing there for me at all. I skipped meals so Daniel could have enough. I patched his school trousers again and again, stitching each rip with thread and love. And in the harsh Sheffield winters, I walked to work through the snow to save bus fare, coming home with icy feet but a warm heart because my son had eaten. But here's the thing. Despite all the hardship, we were happy. Really happy. We built little rituals that made life feel special. Friday fish and chips wrapped in paper that warmed our hands. Sunday walks through the local park, where Daniel would chase pigeons and laugh in that carefree way only children can. And our favourite, Strictly Come Dancing every Saturday night. We'd sit together under a blanket, judging the dancers like we were experts, even though neither of us had ever taken a proper dance lesson. Those were the moments that made everything worth it. Daniel grew into a gentle, determined boy. He was clever, smarter than I ever was, and so driven that teachers often pulled me aside to tell me how bright his future looked. I lived for those comments. Every sacrifice felt validated. Then the day came. The letter from the University of Manchester offering him a place. I remember holding that envelope like it was gold. My hands were shaking when I opened it. Daniel read the words twice, then threw his arms around me. A hug so tight it pushed the air from my lungs. "Mum," he whispered into my shoulder, "whatever I become, it's because of you. I'll never forget it." I cried that night. Happy tears, proud tears. Tears of relief that somehow, despite the odds, despite the loneliness, despite every cracked knuckle and every skipped meal, I had done something right. For a long time, I believed that promise he made. I held on to it like a lifeline, because it meant everything to me. But life has a strange way of revealing truths you never saw coming. It starts slowly, quietly, almost gently. The way a hairline crack appears in a glass, so small you think it doesn't matter. You don't see how it will eventually split everything wide open. And just as Daniel stepped into his new life, surrounded by new people and new experiences, that first crack began to form. If I had known that the moment Daniel stepped onto that university campus would be the moment my place in his life began to shift, I would have held him tighter at the train station. I would have memorized the weight of his hug, the warmth of his cheek against mine, the way he waved as the train rolled away. But moments only become precious once they've turned into memories, don't they? When Daniel left for the University of Manchester, the silence in my house settled like dust. A heavy kind of silence, the sort that clings to your skin and makes the rooms feel bigger and emptier than they really are. For the first week, I tried to keep busy, cleaning shelves that didn't need cleaning, organising drawers that were already organised, leaving the television on just so the house wouldn't feel hollow. But no amount of noise could hide the fact that Daniel's room, with its unmade bed and crooked movie posters, no longer echoed with his laughter. Still, he called. Every evening, like clockwork. He'd tell me about his lectures, the massive library, how confusing the bus routes were, and how Manchester rain was somehow different from Sheffield rain. More dramatic, he'd say with a laugh. He talked about new friends, new foods, new places. I would lie on my sofa after long shifts, listening to his excitement, smiling like a fool because he sounded happy. And that was all I ever wanted. But change doesn't always arrive with warnings. It slips in quietly, softly, almost politely. After a few months, the calls shifted. First, they moved to every weekend. I didn't complain. I told myself he was busy. University life was full. He had essays to write, events to attend, friends to make. Then the calls became every 2 weeks. I would stare at my phone on Saturday evenings, waiting for the screen to light up. Sometimes I'd pick it up just to make sure the network was working, then once a month. By then, I'd learned to swallow the loneliness before it reached my throat. One evening, during one of those now rare calls, Daniel said her name for the first time. Sophie Bennett. He mentioned her casually, like she was just another friend, but something in his voice softened when he said, Sophie, a gentle dip in tone that didn't go unnoticed. I smiled, told him I was happy for him, and asked a few questions. He answered quickly, almost too quickly, like he didn't want to linger on the topic. I should have sensed something then. But love blinds mothers in ways we never admit aloud. Months later, Daniel said he wanted to bring Sophie to Sheffield, to meet me. I spent the entire week cleaning the house, buying nicer biscuits, dusting the photo frames, and even ironing the good tablecloth, the one we only used at Christmas. When they finally arrived, I saw her step out of the car. And before she even spoke a word, something inside me tightened. Sophie was beautiful, polished, and carried herself like someone who'd never known struggle. She gave me a tight smile, polite but distant, and shook my hand with fingers as cold as winter glass. Inside the house, she barely looked around. Her eyes skimmed over my furniture, my photos, my little Sheffield home. And something in her expression told me it didn't meet her standards. She corrected my pronunciation twice during dinner. Not in a humorous way, not in a gentle way. A sharp, thin-lipped correction, as if she were embarrassed on Daniel's behalf. I watched her watch Daniel, the way she answered questions for him, the way her hand tightened around his arm any time he came close to me, the way she seemed to insert herself between us without physically moving. There was something cold about her. Not icy. Icy can melt. She was frosted glass, opaque, hard, untouchable, and slowly frosting over my son. Every time I tried to ask Daniel something, anything, he grew tense, defensive. Mum, she's just shy. Mum, relax, you're overthinking. Mum, please don't make this weird. Those words stung more than he realized, because I knew shyness. Sophie was not shy. I knew discomfort. Sophie was not uncomfortable. I knew when someone simply wasn't interested in knowing me, and that was Sophie, through and through. When they left that day, Daniel hugged me. But it wasn't the same kind of hug. It was polite, quick, distracted, like his mind was already back in Manchester, following Sophie out the front door. After they drove away, I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the empty street. A mother knows when something has shifted, when she's no longer the center of her child's world, when someone else is sliding into that space, slowly, quietly, carefully, until she's standing on the outside of her own child's life. I felt it that day. A subtle, almost invisible shift. The beginning of something I couldn't name yet. But the real crack, the deep one, the one that would eventually split everything apart, arrived the next time Daniel called. A call where he said something so unexpected, so unsettling, that it made me realize Sophie wasn't just part of his life. She was taking over it, and I was being moved aside, piece by piece. After some time, one ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind where the Yorkshire sky hangs grey and heavy, and the school corridors smell faintly of disinfectant and crayons. I was wiping down the reception notice board when Carol from the office marched toward me, clutching her phone like it was something dangerous. "Mags," she said, slightly breathless, "have you seen Facebook?" I frowned, still holding my cloth. "No, why?" Her face softened, and that softness terrified me more than anything. "Oh, love, your Daniel's engaged." The world tilted. For a moment I thought she must have mistaken someone else's post for my son's. My Daniel would have called me. He would have at least texted. He wouldn't let his own mother find out through Facebook gossip like a stranger. But Carol thrust her phone into my hand, and there it was. A photo of Daniel down on one knee on a London rooftop, fairy lights scattered behind them like fallen stars. Sophie's hands covered her mouth in a perfect, camera-ready gasp. He was smiling, wide, proud, as if the whole world belonged to them. My own reflection stared back at me from the screen, stunned and hollow. I felt my knees weaken. I gripped the desk so hard my knuckles went white. Someone walked past, muttering something about the Year 3 assembly, but their voice sounded underwater. All I could see was that one image, my son committing to a new life he hadn't even told me about. I handed the phone back to Carol, swallowing the rising sting in my throat. "Maybe he was going to tell you tonight," she offered gently. But I knew she didn't believe that. Neither did I. I spent the rest of my shift on autopilot. I nodded when the head teacher spoke to me. I handed out worksheets to the Year 5s. I answered yes and no at the right moments. But my heart wasn't there. It was on that rooftop in London, in the glow of fairy lights where I had never been invited. The moment my shift ended, I walked home faster than I had in years. The cold Sheffield wind cut at my cheeks, but I barely noticed. My fingers trembled as I dialed his number. He answered on the third ring. "Mum." Just one word, and I heard it. The guilt, thick and unmistakable. "So it's true," I whispered. "You're engaged?" A pause, too long, too telling. "It all happened quickly," he finally said. "Sophie planned this little thing, and it just happened." "And you couldn't call your own mother?" My voice cracked in a way I hadn't intended. "Mum, it's been busy. Work, life. Things have been hectic." I closed my eyes. This was the boy who used to run to me with every scraped knee, who told me about every new friend, every exam, every silly thought. And now he couldn't pick up the phone to share the biggest moment of his life. "I'd like to speak to Sophie," I said, steady but firm. Another pause. I don't think now's a good time. She's not really up for talking." Not up for talking to her future mother-in-law. Something twisted sharply in my chest. Before I could ask anything else, he rushed out a quick goodbye, the kind that sounded more like an escape than affection. And then he was gone. Later that evening, after work at Tesco, I sat at my tiny kitchen table, the same one where Daniel used to do his homework while I made fish and chips, and stared at the engagement photos on my own phone, photo after photo, a ring, a kiss, her friends cheering, his smile, proud, polished, distant. My son, my whole world, glowing in a life that no longer seemed to include me. As I scrolled through the comments, my stomach tightened. Such a perfect couple. Welcome to the family, Sophie. He's done well for himself. Total upgrade. Upgrade. The word punched me in the chest, and then I saw it, a comment from one of Sophie's friends. Sophie always said she didn't want working-class drama at the wedding. Working class drama. That was me. Me, the mother who starved so Daniel could eat. Me, the woman who walked to work in the snow to save bus money. Me, the one who held him when he cried for the father who left. I felt something inside me crack so quietly I almost missed it. As I sat there in the dim kitchen, I heard the letterbox clatter. A thin white envelope fell onto the floor. I got up slowly, wiped my eyes, and picked it up. The sender's address made my heart lurch. Daniel Turner, London. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a single card, a single sentence, and it changed everything. There comes a moment in every mother's life when silence becomes unbearable, when the fear of knowing the truth is still easier than the fear of being forgotten. That moment came for me 3 days after I opened Daniel's letter, a letter that didn't mention me once. Not even as Mum, just a typed notification about an engagement celebration for friends and close family. Close family, yet my name was nowhere. I realized then that if I didn't go to him, I might lose him completely. So I packed a small overnight bag, took the earliest train from Sheffield to London, and rehearsed all the gentle, careful things I wanted to say. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to judge Sophie. I just wanted to see my son's face, the one I'd loved since he first opened his tiny newborn eyes and looked straight at me as though recognizing his home. Wimbledon was colder than Sheffield that day, strangely enough. A sharp, unfriendly cold that seeped into my coat as I walked from the station. The streets were lined with tidy hedges and spotless cars. A far cry from our little terrace house with its squeaky gate and stubborn rosebush that refused to bloom. Daniel's building was sleek and modern, the kind with lift access and coded gates. I buzzed up. A moment of silence. Then Sophie's voice crackled through the intercom. "Hello?" It's Margaret," I said, suddenly aware of how small my voice sounded. A pause, a sigh, barely concealed. Then the gate clicked. When she opened the flat door, the look on her face wasn't surprise or welcome. It was annoyance, pure, sharp, unfiltered. "Oh," she said, forcing a thin smile. "You came." "I was in London and thought I'd visit," I lied, though we both knew Sheffield was 170 miles away. Her eyes flicked to my overnight bag. She didn't step aside immediately, as though she was debating whether to let me in at all. "Right," she said finally, moving 1 inch to the left. "Well, come in." The warmth of the flat hit me immediately. Not a cozy warmth, but the artificial kind from modern radiators and expensive candles that smelled like bergamot and eucalyptus. And then I saw it, their engagement photos, dozens of them, on the walls, on the shelves, on the console table, even as the screensaver on the TV, a slideshow of rooftop kisses and champagne smiles. But not a single photo of Daniel and me, not one. The realization hit like a physical blow, as though I'd been erased. Daniel appeared from the kitchen, a tea towel over his shoulder. "Mum, I didn't know you were coming." He hugged me, but it was quick, polite, the kind you give a neighbor, not the woman who raised you alone. I pretended not to notice. "You look tired," Sophie said, glancing at my shoes. "The journey must have been long." "It wasn't too bad," I said softly. She tilted her head, a small faux apologetic smile. "We didn't really plan for guests." "I won't be any trouble." "I hope so," she murmured. I tried so hard, so painfully hard, to make things light. I offered to cook dinner, wanting to recreate one of Daniel's favourites, something warm he grew up with. "Oh, we're on a strict diet," Sophie said, placing a manicured hand on her waist. "We don't really eat heavy food." Heavy? She meant my food. I swallowed the hurt. "Well, I brought some biscuits Daniel used to love," I said cheerfully, pulling out a tin I'd decorated with a little red bow. She stared at it like it was a pack of cigarettes. "Ah, how sweet," she said, placing it on the counter, far away, behind a stack of cookbooks for clean living. And what's this? She added, holding up the scarf I'd knitted Daniel, soft grey wool, patterned carefully over weeks. A gift for the winter, I said. I thought, oh, she interrupted, tossing it gently onto a chair. I'm sure he has plenty. Daniel didn't say a word. That evening, they ordered a salad. 2 bowls for them, none for me because we thought you might not be hungry after travelling. I sat at the table anyway, trying not to look lost. Later, I offered to sleep at a nearby hotel, but Daniel insisted I take the sofa. Sophie didn't argue, but her silence felt like a verdict. Around midnight, I woke to whispers. Sharp ones. Behind the slightly ajar bedroom door, I hadn't meant to listen, but they were talking about me. She just turned up, Daniel, Sophie hissed. It's embarrassing. She's my mum, Daniel whispered back. She doesn't fit the image we want, the wedding, the guests. You know how important this is to my family? A cold wave washed over me. Image, guests, my family. She'll ruin things, Sophie added. Please, Daniel, don't make this harder. My breath caught. I lay still on the sofa, eyes burning in the dark, pretending to be asleep. But every word pierced straight into me. Not fit the image, ruin things. Me. His mother. I couldn't sleep after that. I stared at the ceiling, listening to my own heartbeat, wondering when exactly I'd become someone Daniel needed to hide. As the night dragged on, the flat grew quieter, but my mind didn't. Something inside me shifted. Not anger, not yet. Just a deep, bone-aching pain, the kind you can't swallow down anymore. And as dawn crept into the living room, painting everything pale and cold, I made a decision. I would confront Daniel before I left, but I didn't know that the moment I walked into that kitchen the next morning, I wouldn't find Daniel. Hope is a dangerous thing for a mother. It makes you believe in miracles long after the evidence has told you to give up. And after that painful visit to Wimbledon, after overhearing words that sliced me open, I still clung to hope with trembling fingers. I told myself Daniel would come to his senses. He'd call, he'd apologize. He'd say Sophie was stressed. He'd reassure me that I mattered, that I still had a place in his life. For a few days after I returned to Sheffield, I kept my phone close, checking it with every buzz, every vibration, even phantom ones my mind invented out of longing. But Daniel didn't call. Not that night, not the next, not that week. I tried to stay busy with work, scrubbing the school floors, straightening displays at Tesco, but my heart wasn't in any of it. Every aisle reminded me of Daniel, the biscuits he used to point at with pleading eyes, the cereal he insisted tasted better in the blue box than the red one, the chocolates I bought him after every school play. Now he was planning a wedding, and I didn't even know when, or where, or if I would be welcome. Eventually, I gathered the courage to call him. "Hi, Mum," he said, rushed and distant. "Daniel, I wanted to ask about the wedding, dates, venues, colours. I'd love to help with—" "Mum," he interrupted, "we haven't finalised everything yet." His tone made it sound like I was asking for something unreasonable, like wanting to know about my only child's wedding was a burden. "Oh," I managed. "Right. Well, keep me posted, love." "Yeah, sure. Listen, I've got to go. Sophie's family are coming for dinner." Of course they were. And then he hung up. 3 days later, while I was sorting through the lost and found box at the school, my phone vibrated. It was Carol, again the bearer of bad news. "Mags, have you seen the wedding website?" My stomach dropped. "No, why?" "Oh, love." The same soft voice she'd used when she showed me the engagement photos. "You should have a look." I opened Facebook. There it was, shared publicly, so half of Sheffield seemed to have already commented on it. The wedding of Sophie Bennett and Daniel Turner, Wimbledon, London. The page was immaculate, pastel colours, gold accents, professional photos, captions dripping with elegance and perfection. I swallowed hard and clicked Meet the Families. Sophie's parents were described as the loving, devoted family of the bride, pillars of support, elegance and tradition. Their photos were everywhere, smiling at graduations, hugging at picnics, sitting proudly at her milestones. Then I scrolled down to the groom section. My eyes froze. My breath stopped. Because under groom's parents, it didn't say Margaret Turner. It didn't say anything. Just a photo of Daniel, alone. A single line underneath. Daniel wishes to honor all those who helped shape his journey. Helped shape his journey. I raised that boy alone. I worked myself to the bone so he could have a life better than mine. And now I wasn't even worth a name. I stared at the screen so long my eyes stung. Every click felt like peeling back a new layer of pain. The venue. The bridal party, the menu tasting, the rehearsal dinner. Everything had been planned, everything was beautiful, and I had been told nothing, not even the date. To make things worse, my neighbours started asking me excitedly, "Oh, Margaret, have you seen Daniel's wedding plans? Are you helping choose the suit? Are you going down to London soon?" Each question was a dagger I had to pretend I didn't feel. Even Daniel's old schoolmates, boys who had once sat in my kitchen eating biscuits and talking about football, knew more about the wedding than I did. One of them messaged me directly. "Mrs. Turner, are you excited for the big day next month?" Next month. Next month. I felt the world spin. I sat down on my tiny sofa, the same old faded one Daniel and I used to curl up on during Strictly, and I finally saw the truth. Sophie didn't just dislike me. She didn't just find me embarrassing. She didn't just look down on me. She wanted me erased. And Daniel, my son, the boy I would have given everything for, was letting it happen. Letting her wipe me out of his story like I never existed. But pain has a strange way of turning into clarity. One night, as I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep, I realized something. If Sophie was bold enough to erase me from the wedding website, then what else was she planning to do? And what I discovered a week later, quite by accident, was far worse. Because when a white envelope arrived with elegant handwriting on the front, addressed not to me but to someone I'd never even met, I opened it, and inside was something that made my hands go cold and my heart stop. It was the moment I realized the wedding wasn't just happening without me, it was happening in secret. 1 week before the wedding, a wedding I still had no official invitation to, my phone finally rang. I'd been washing up the dishes, my hands in warm, soapy water. When I saw Daniel's name flash on the screen, my heart lifted, foolishly, desperately. I dried my hands on my apron and answered with a breathless, "Daniel, love, is everything all right?" His voice came through thin, trembling around the edges. "Mum, we need to talk." For a second, hope flickered again. Maybe he was calling to apologize, to explain, to finally include me. But then he took a shaky breath, the kind he used to take as a boy right before confessing he'd broken something valuable. "Mum, Sophie and I think it'd be best if you didn't come." I froze. For a moment, I truly believed I'd misheard him, that the line had cut, that he meant something else. "Didn't come where?" I whispered. The silence stretched like an open wound. "To the wedding," he said quietly. Something inside me cracked so sharply I felt it in my ribs. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. "Why?" I asked, barely able to push the word out. "It's not personal," he rushed. "It's just that Sophie's parents already planned the seating, and there's no space. And it might be—" He hesitated. Then he said the word that changed everything. "Awkward." Awkward. Me, his mother, would make his wedding awkward. Not the woman who refused to let me near him, not the family who pretended I didn't exist, not the genteel hypocrisy behind their perfect smiles. Me. I felt heat rising behind my eyes, a pressure in my chest like my heart was trying to escape. "Awkward," I repeated softly. My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded old, forgotten. "Mum, please don't be upset," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "It's just easier this way." Easier. I swallowed the heartbreak clawing up my throat. Then I asked him a question no mother should ever have to ask her child, a question I never thought would form on my lips. Daniel, my voice trembled, am I an embarrassment to you? Silence, not a breath, not a word, not a denial, just silence. A silence more brutal than any answer he could have given. I closed my eyes, waiting, praying for him to say something, anything. But he didn't. And then I heard a faint rustle, Sophie's voice in the background, sharp and impatient. Just end it, Daniel, we're late. A few seconds later, the call cut off. I stood there in my small kitchen, holding my phone like it was evidence of a crime. The line was dead, but the words still echoed through the room, through my bones. When I finally lowered the phone, my hand was shaking. The house felt colder than winter, colder than the day his father left, colder than any night I'd spent alone struggling to raise him. Because this wasn't abandonment, it was rejection by my own child. I sank into the nearest chair, staring at the wallpaper Daniel once helped me choose, back when he was 13 and insisted we pick the pattern with the fun little flowers because it looked cheerful. Now those flowers blurred as tears filled my eyes. Silent, heavy tears I tried to blink away but couldn't stop. Mum, don't come. Those words replayed again and again, cutting deeper each time. I don't know how long I sat there, minutes, hours, but by the time I finally moved, the sky outside had darkened. The house was so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I didn't try, but because every time I closed my eyes, I heard my son's silence. I made myself a cup of tea I couldn't drink. I sat in my robe, staring at nothing, my chest heavy with a grief I didn't know how to name. The morning of the wedding arrived like any other grey Sheffield day, cold, damp, and unrelenting. I didn't dress up. I didn't even leave the house. No train to London, no carefully packed bag, no hopeful knock at a hotel room door. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the drizzle blur the streets outside. The kettle hissed and steamed, the aroma of the tea filling the small kitchen like a faint comfort, but it did nothing to warm the hollow ache in my chest. I imagined my son standing at an altar, tall, polished, smiling, while I sat alone, hundreds of miles away. Every memory rushed back in a wave I wasn't ready for. The scraped knees I bandaged in the living room, the school runs in the rain when we had to share one umbrella, the nights I stayed awake, worrying over bills, homework, or just whether he was happy. All those years of sacrifices, of love poured into a life I thought I'd shared with him. And now I was invisible. I sat quietly, my hands wrapped around the warm mug, when there was a knock at the door. Firm, determined. Not the hesitant knock of a neighbour, but of someone who had come with a purpose. I hesitated, heart hammering. When I opened the door, there she was, Emily, Sophie's cousin, still in her bridesmaid dress, one side of her hair pinned perfectly, the other slightly loose from the long day of celebration. I froze. I didn't know what to say. She shouldn't be here. Mum, Emily began, but then corrected herself. I mean, Margaret, I'm so sorry. Her voice was soft, nervous, like she'd been carrying something heavy. She wrung her hands. I gestured for her to come in, wordless. She stepped inside, carefully, and perched on the edge of a kitchen chair, her eyes darting to the tea kettle. Sophie wanted me to tell you, she said finally. She didn't want you there. I blinked, waiting for the words to land. She told Daniel, Emily continued, her voice trembling slightly. If your mum comes, I'll cancel the wedding. The room felt smaller suddenly, as though the walls were closing in. And Daniel, Emily's voice broke, he chose the wedding. I closed my eyes, clutching the edge of the table, as though holding on could keep the world from spinning off its axis. Emily, why are you telling me this? I whispered. She looked down, her fingers twisting the fabric of her dress. Because I couldn't let this go without you knowing. I saw what happened to you, Margaret. I saw the look on your face when I overheard Sophie talking earlier this week, before the wedding. You raised him. You did everything for him. And yet she made him choose over you. I don't think Daniel knew how far she'd go, but she made him choose. I felt the tears welling again. Not angry tears, not even sad tears. Just empty tears, the kind that pour out when your heart feels like it has been quietly erased. Emily stood, hesitant. I didn't want to ruin anything for him, for Daniel, but I couldn't let you go without knowing the truth. He's your son, and you deserve to know. And then, as she turned to leave, she paused at the door. I hope one day he realizes what he's lost, but you should know something else, something Daniel didn't tell you about the wedding, and it might change everything you think you know. I caught my breath. What is it? Emily hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the window as if afraid someone outside might overhear. It's about Sophie, about why she didn't want you there, and it's about the kind of control she has over Daniel now. You need to hear this from me, Margaret, before it's too late. Her words hung in the air, heavy, trembling, almost unbearably urgent. I knew then that whatever Emily was about to tell me could change everything, and that my son's life and my own place in it would never be the same. Emily stepped closer to the kitchen table, her bridesmaid dress still rumpled from the day's events. She lowered her voice as though the walls themselves might carry her words to the wrong ears. Margaret, Sophie didn't just not want you at the wedding because of, well, social differences, she began. She's always been controlling. She manipulates Daniel. She's made him believe that anything you do, anything, could ruin his life, his career, his image. She's not just keeping you out. She's rewriting the story of your son's life without you in it. I felt a cold wave pass through me. I whispered, she's stolen him. Emily shook her head. No, she hasn't stolen him. Daniel chose to follow her, and he's so deeply under her influence he doesn't even realize it. He thinks he's doing the right thing, but Margaret, you raised him. He's still your son, and he always will be. I swallowed, trying to steady the storm of emotions building inside me. Anger, heartbreak, grief, shame, loneliness, but also love. That fierce, stubborn love that no one, not Sophie, not her family, not even Daniel, could ever take away. I sat there quietly, letting her words sink in, tears streaming silently down my cheeks. Emily gave me a small, sad smile. I couldn't let you be left completely in the dark. I know Daniel isn't ready to see it yet. But you need to be ready for yourself. And then she left. I stayed by the window long after she'd gone, watching the rain streak the grey streets. The wedding lights in London must have been sparkling by now, a perfect, glimmering celebration. And I was sitting here, alone, invisible. For a moment, I let myself feel the ache. I let myself mourn. I mourned for the son I had raised with love, for the years I had poured into him, and for the life we might have shared as mother and son, fully and openly. But then, slowly, a different feeling crept in. I realized something profound. No one can erase the years you gave to your child. No one can erase the nights you stayed awake, the meals you skipped, the prayers whispered in the dark for someone else's happiness. No one can erase the love that built him into the man he is, even if that man is now making choices that break your heart. I would not sit quietly and allow my grief to define me. I went into Daniel's old room and picked up his baby blanket, the one I had sewn together after nights of tears and worry. I held it to my chest, and I whispered, not to Daniel, not to Sophie, but to myself, I will survive this. I will always love you, my boy, but I will not let this destroy me. I realized then that sometimes the child you die for grows up to break your heart, and sometimes the greatest heartbreak carries the greatest lesson. that your own life, your own dignity, and your own happiness are still yours to claim. Weeks passed. I never attended the wedding, never saw the photographs, never heard Daniel's voice again for a long while. But life moved on, in quiet, ordinary ways. I returned to work, kept my home, nurtured friendships, and slowly rebuilt the version of myself that had faded under years of sacrifice. And one afternoon, as I was walking through the park Daniel and I used to stroll in every Sunday, I felt a quiet strength settle over me. I understood then that love doesn't always look the way you imagine. Sometimes it hurts, sometimes it disappears, but it doesn't vanish. It lives in you, in the life you've built, and in the boundaries you now choose to set. And though Daniel had made a choice I couldn't approve of, though Sophie had tried to erase me, I had chosen myself. I had chosen love that honored me, not just him. The world outside my window was still grey, the rain still falling, but inside, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in years. I was still Margaret Turner, I was still a mother, and I was still alive. Even if my son didn't see me now, I saw myself, and that was everything. If you've ever been in a situation like mine, pushed aside, ignored, erased from a life you helped build, then you know the kind of pain that doesn't announce itself loudly. It sits quietly in your chest. It wakes you at night. It whispers, "What did I do wrong?" Even when you did everything right. If you've ever watched someone you love choose someone else's comfort over your presence. If you've ever been treated like an inconvenience in a story you were supposed to belong to. If you've ever been told, directly or indirectly, that your love is unwanted. Then you know what it means to feel both heartbreak and humiliation at the same time. You know the ache of waiting for a call that doesn't come. You know the sting of seeing your name missing from places it should never have been excluded. You know the silence that feels louder than any shout. But if you've ever been in this kind of situation, then you also know something else. You survived. And maybe, like me, you learned that sometimes the people you love the most can still break you. But the strength you find afterward, that belongs only to you. You learn to breathe again. You learn to stand again. You learn that being excluded from someone else's life doesn't mean you must exclude yourself from your own. And in the end, you discover a love far more powerful than the one that left you behind. A love for yourself. Loved this story? Subscribe and be part of our family. We share every heartbreak, every triumph, and every lesson together.